Welcome to all of you. I'm very excited actually to present to you. And as it was said, I come from Dubai. So the proper pronunciation, I work for a University of Wollongong in Dubai, which is Australian University, a city of Wollongong, Australia, but it has a campus in Dubai. So, like it's been said, I'm going to talk about today, especially the perspective of the academy and the universities in terms of education and digital well-being and all connected to digital life. So I am, as it was said, Ludmil Trenkov, and I'm assistant professor of media design in United Arab Emirates, and MFA is actually Masters of Fine Arts. It's considered a terminal degree in design, which is basically the highest degree that you'd have in design. And so just in case if you weren't sure what that was. So I want to start by talking about sort of what is the role of education today in the era of all things digital. You know, sort of it's one of the really an old sort of practices that we've had for thousands of years, where we've sort of educated, passed knowledge. And now in the education world and in the digital world, there seem to be quite a new sort of questions to be answered and understanding who does what and what's useful and what's expected. So I've been thinking a lot about what is what, and I clearly have been sort of establishing these two concepts that need to be differentiated for me. What is education and what is training? So I don't find them equal. They have their own place, but it's useful to sort of understand what is one and what is the other. So education, in my assessment and my experience, is a very slow and transformative experience. So we have it takes like usually 3 to 4 years, so undergraduate degree. If you add master's, then 6-7 years. If you add PhD, might go over 10 years or so. However, it's guaranteed to be transformative. And what I mean by this is sort of, and I've seen this over and over, when a student or a young sort of aspiring professional wants to get on a track of being educated, it really enters as one person and absolutely leaves as a very different person just because of that sort of process of education. So we must remind ourselves that education is an involuntary process. And I'm sort of reminded of this every day, sort of how many students just simply don't want to be there, and either their parents or they just need to get a diploma because of what their plans are or whatever it is that it is. But it's not very few actually really want to be there. So that needs to be taken into account. Also, education on the other side is sort of developing a fundamental understanding of the world. So I find that's one of the most valuable things of education in general, is sort of begins to set you into understanding what the world is, how it is, and eventually where you stand and what could be. Education is always, in my experience, sort of an opinion, is always connected to the future, is always, I find it to be very effective prepare for the unknown and the certain future, because we all know that it's definitely coming. So the question is, do we know what we need to know? Are we equipped to do what we have to do? And let's not forget that education is also a very good predictor of future success. So no matter what sort of stories you might have seen or heard, vast majority of people that we track as success or we emulate or we're interested in are basically have very robust education behind them. So training on the other side is a very rapid, in my opinion, and prescribed process, meaning sort of relatively short amount of time, follows specific pattern, and produces what we perceive as some kind of a training or educational outcomes fairly quickly. So training in its very definition sort of instills pragmatic processes and abilities, meaning it really gets us to understand how to do things, how we can make something in some sequential way. So in other words, we could be useful immediately right after that, right after we complete our training. Training is also very marketable because a lot of times it's connected to what's needed, what is the call for sort of talent in the world, and answers immediate needs. Sort of, we need this kind of people, we need those kind of people. So training really fills in this gap that in many ways, education, because of its slow nature and it's sort of more of a, by definition, different mission, sometimes it's difficult to add. Training is also, I find it very timely. So it always demonstrates a contemporary relevance. So it's always up to date, and what you would be trained in today may be quite different what you need to be trained in tomorrow. So, but it's always related to where we stand in time and place. Also, finally, it's very important to sort of remember, and a lot of you probably have experienced this already, training is upgrading. So it's basically an incremental addition to existing skills. So in other words, we have had some experience educating and preparing ourselves, but the world has changed, demands have changed. So we are definitely adding and extending what we're able and what we can prove we can do. And here is a very crucial point that I like to bring in. Basically, this whole transformation of analog to digital. We all feel it, we all see it, but it's not sort of unnecessary to just keep reminding ourselves that we actually, for most part, brought up in a very analog world with physical and sort of, and then we move rapidly into a digital world. So the analog world in many ways is defined by its material nature. It's very tactile, it's very physical, and it's very close. Sort of, you can grab it, you can touch it, you can sort of embrace it, and you can feel it in a very, very visceral way. In the same time, digital world, which sort of begins to enter our world like rapidly, it's very virtual. So in other words, you can extend your hand into it and you may or may not feel anything. It's just simply an illusion of volume and an illusion of something that we would recognize as physical. So it's no longer physical, it's just simply a representation. It's boundless. Anyone that has done 3D design, they know there is no beginning, no end, no up, no down. It's just simply, it could move in all directions and there is nothing to stop it. There is no physical laws, although there's a lot of simulation in that. But on the other side, it's very highly customizable. And that's just the biggest promise that seduces into the digital world, that it could be made for us only or with specifically. And that's a sort of a thing that you need to keep reminding. That is a promise, but there's always a trade-off. We can never forget that it's sort of like, and we all know that we live in a digital world that is endless ocean with almost no escape. In other words, unless you decide to live what we would know as outside of off the grid, so in other words, you do not connect with the world as is, then you will be interacting, interfering, and dealing with that world. And this is a topic that is very important to me. And that is just basically the challenges of what is real and what is truth. So we have, so in this case, Michaela, sort of like, so basically a digital influencer that if you follow her, sort of, she has an Instagram channel, she gives interviews, she goes on vacations, she meets friends, she eats at the McDonald's, she has everything that sort of a teenager has. She never ages, she never gets sick, or if she does, she recovers quickly. And so there's no threats to her, there's only upside of her life. But in reality, she only exists as digital bits on some computers in Los Angeles. And so finally, the big question that comes in is sort of, can we educate students on digital living? So basically, is there a role for us to play? So in my opinion, absolutely yes. So we need to be able to, we can, and in my sort of effort, we do. So you have to recognize that education or have their own needs, and in digital realities, we not only prepare for the digital world, but also we have to work with the digital world. So there's a huge pressure and demand to introduce that digital reality into the classroom and into what we do. And I must say, it's quite a uphill battle because it's a constantly contradicts the inherent missions and practices. Education and professional realities are sometimes in synchrony, sometimes in conflict. So we have a professional world that has its demand, and there is the educational world that has its own practice and abilities that are constantly sort of interacting with each other, sometimes complementing, and sometimes sort of resisting each other, so to speak. And then preparing for digital future is quite an imperative. And for me, what is even interesting and important is sort of preparing for digital existence. So that does not necessarily mean to really approve or disapprove or consent or anything. It's just simply to bring more understanding what it is. So those of you that might sort of remember Second Life, that created a whole sort of digital world in which there was a lot of action, and including there was implications for this world happening there. Now we have the metaverse, sort of like a revived Second Life, and sort of trying to tell us that everything you need and you want will be there, everything valuable will be there. So these are the issues that need to be addressed and sort of pondered on in that kind of setting. So I think the academy is a very good place to do that. And also by implication to connect with digital well-being. So the academy, for those who might not know, it's sort of, sometimes we use more in the business as the summative term of what sort of referring to all of the higher education, sort of like, and that's where people that think high thoughts, talk about students, research, do all sorts of activities that are related to that. So we have to remind ourselves what is the mission, the practice of that academy or the universities. They've always been about retaining knowledge, expanding knowledge through research and practice, and empowering knowledge, sort of giving it to and educating students and sort of to take that knowledge into the world and do what they do. By that definition, it's a rather, the academy is it's quite a conservative sort of institution. And this is why the digital world, which moves very rapidly, sometimes just has a hard time finding its place in the academy. And it takes a lot of give and takes and push and whatever it is that we want to say about that. So that naturally leads to the question, what is the role of the educator in the academy? Sort of, what does somebody who deals with students and educates to have to do? So, so I would say it's a chief clarifier and storyteller. Sort of just based on my practice, I find myself constantly telling the subject through a storytelling sort of point of view, always clarifying and explaining and sort of defining whatever the topics is at the moment. I find it that is very important to be a practitioner of very accurate and precise language. I'm a very big believer the language defines a lot of things that come after it. So the way we define things through language and the way we sort of perpetuate things through language and eventually how we interact with the world through language is sort of very important. And I think I spend personally a lot of time clarifying specific even words, phrases, and specific terminology so that there is sense of clarity when we discuss, we all mean the same thing. Critical thinking is really an incredibly important component. So everything that I do, I try to sort of critically sort of evaluate and promote this whole idea of what is in front of me and what actually happens or does not happen or should happen. And in the same time, I need to always bring this whole idea of like, what is the digital history, introduce it, bring it in. And if you talk about digital life or digital world, it's sort of where is it coming from? And eventually that may give us some answers where it might be going to. So this is an aspect that sometimes is not well seen or understood, but I feel sort of I take on the role of personal counselor or a life coach. Sort of, I've had numerous examples where I just simply, for the sake of doing my business, which is sort of educating students, I have to actually take on a very personal missions to sort of advise and guide students and mentor in many different directions. And that just sort of, I would say, comes with the territory, and it's just an inevitable thing of things. So now I want to talk about sort of specifically what individual actions I have taken or have practiced in relationship to sort of digital life and eventually leading towards a better digital living. So there's a project that I've developed sort of on digital living that was related to, very opportunistically, I've sort of constructed it because we had a video wall that was consist of 55-inch screens that were arranged to work together or individually as needed. And so I constructed this assignment for the students that will, all of them were supposed to create a sound collage of just the sounds of their digital living up to no more than a minute long. And they all voted. In this case, there was 13 of them. They all voted and they selected one soundtrack. So first we created the soundtrack, and then everyone took the soundtrack and created a video of the medium of their choice, as long as it's motion, they had to respond to that soundtrack. And here is the sort of the resulting video. So it's important sort of to remind that this was a really designed sort of to bring awareness sort of students, the life they live, the world they live in, and eventually sort of by being aware of it, then eventually they can continue thinking in a more deeper level of what that is and what does that mean to them. As an instructor, as an educator, I need to constantly communicate with students. So I found about 12 years ago sort of the only way that originally used to be sort of email. We were just sort of asked to email. I found that to be very inefficient and sort of cumbersome, and just sort of abandoned the whole notion of email. And we transitioned completely to WhatsApp. So all my classes are actually run by WhatsApp. And I have sort of run either every class has a group, and that group looks at individual sort of, we can discuss projects, we can discuss things that are happening, we can discuss sort of issues that they need support with. I can send them various communications of what we're doing next. They give me feedback of what they're doing, what is happening. And I can also share points of inspiration or things that might be useful for them as they're working on a specific projects. I can also have individual conversations with them aside for giving feedback or just simply discuss anything they need. So it's basically an ongoing communication with them. And that I've sort of discovered to be very useful, because otherwise we meet, let's just say, once or twice a week, and then we don't have any more sort of, we need to wait the whole week to do that. So then I also try to sort of bring up the whole idea of workflow and habits. So I bring in sort of this whole notion of understanding what platforms, hardware tools, just to simply orient them in this world of hardware and software, what is what, not necessarily promoting one and the other, but just to understand what is useful, what is maybe have different alternative sort of opportunities for them to understand. Also forming a very good digital work habits, sort of understanding the notions, files, folders, naming conventions, and most importantly, backup and protection. I've had a student that almost lost everything. Her computer crashed right at almost the day she was graduating. And it was just a real catastrophe because it would have been, because that was all of her work. So just everything that she's worked for 4 years disappeared. So luckily she managed to take a sort of some kind of a recovery service, and they managed to extract the data, which is the most valuable part. So she was saved. The digital stress, it's sort of something, especially from digital life, is very important, and that's just sort of inevitable. So I try to inculturate sort of into them that they should look at it just simply problem, formulate a problem, and then the resolution is just simply a solution, working systematically and methodically, understanding what different supports are, what they can do to help themselves. Then here's something that's very interesting I like to share, sort of like what I would call tools for first inquiry, or sort of the evolution of sort of how students begin to initially source knowledge. So about 12 years or like 13 years ago, it was just simply they would go to Google, type in, and whatever Google tells them, that's what they start with. Then they sort of abandoned Google. They started going to YouTube, and whatever YouTube gives them, that was their sort of the first point. Then gradually, when TikTok sort of blossomed, that was there. And now we're at a chat GPT stage, and sort of they're doing that. So now, speaking of chat GPT, the entry of AI. So I need to sort of really bring up this and sort of mention what is that and what is that as to us. So I sort of liken AI from my perspective as that genie that really you rub it and it comes out and fulfills your sort of wishes in the form of outputting text, outputting images, or outputting whatever it is that you are asking, and it's capable of doing. So it just, all you do, your whole effort on your side is basically just to ask, and it does. So naturally, the question is, who's learning what using AI? So as an educator, I'm always wondering sort of like, okay, there is this thing and we want to be using it, or we are asked to use it, or there is a pressure or whatever. So now the question is, how does that add or subtract from the learning? And so I want to bring in sort of, in addition to my just sort of another voice of a very prominent figure in sort of the design world, sort of the leader of one of the leading design institutions in the United States. This is Elliot Earls from Cranbrook Academy. So here's some of his thoughts on design learning.
We don't hear any of the sound.
Oh. Sorry. Sorry, I heard that you don't hear anything. You didn't hear anything I said.
You need to reshare and include the sound. There's a checkbox you have to tick.
Oh, jeez.
Stop sharing and then share again with the sound on.
Okay. Whew. So nothing I said you heard?
No, we were hearing all the time. We don't hear the video.
Oh, you don't hear the video. So let me just do one thing. I'm going to just quickly replay my student's video because sort of it was a good experience, and then we go to the current video. Can you hear now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
It's the first thing you see when you open your eyes.
Good morning. This is your wake-up call.
Hello. Interface.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, so that was that. And let me just go back to now. Okay, so here's
So in order to learn as an artist or a designer, there's a fundamental activity that I believe that one must get involved in, and that is active creation of work, producing the work, and then primarily sitting in the presence of the work, thinking through the ramifications of the work, and then producing more work as a response to the thing previous. Now, there are complexities to that. In other words, you can submit that work to critique, you can talk about it with colleagues, you can talk about it with a mentor or a peer, but the feedback loop, the capacity to make work, emphasis on work, to assess the work and to produce a version 2, 3, and 4 that track a stable trajectory through a process, that is the primary way, one of the primary structures by which we get better.
So, and moving forward, everybody knows what a portfolio is and sort of like what is important. So I think there's a very important aspect.
In so many ways, a portfolio is really a reflection of the work ethic of the student.
And eventually that lead us to basically his assessment of sort of like, where do we go sort of once the AI enters very seriously the design world? Where
artificial intelligence tools, as they develop over the course of the next 5, 10, or 15 years, are going to eliminate tons of plenty of work. But what it's going to do is it's going to push, I believe it's going to push artistic production back into a kind of material condition that is profoundly not informed, not digital.
So with that in mind, basically, I'd like to sort of be in praise of the material as an antidote to the digital first and digital last. So most of all leading design institutions, especially that teach design, robustly design, actually have some kind of analog process included in their pedagogy, whether through letterpress or some kind of mechanical practices in their classes. So this is still quite well understood and incorporated. I hope that stays and we don't just go to completely digital and we don't understand that, or we abandon the material role completely. So I always invite sort of to maintain a very instilled like digital hygiene and discipline. In other words, understanding what we should accept, what we shouldn't, and that eventually will lead us to what I would call a digital independence. And so what I would say, digital well-being, which is one of the main topic of this gathering, is sort of can be assured, in my opinion, to just strongly developing a robust digital immune system. So it's simply to understand how to deal with the world and accept it as it's working for us, not always as it's given. So finally, for those that are interested in working with sort of younger people or younger educators and people that are sort of trying to get into it, and they're sort of thinking, how do I cultivate digital, sort of better understanding digital life, eventually promote digital well-being? I sort of put together a few points in my experience that are very important. And so firstly, explain versus instruct. What I would say with this is sort of emphasis on always creating larger context, always sort of understanding where things are coming, where are they going, and what's the sort of the larger world around a single point term idea, rather than just simply say, do this, do that, and just sort of simply instruct and don't ask any questions. Another one would be to encourage criticality. So in other words, critical usually in the design sense is being critical is being analytical, sort of analyzing what's in front of you, understanding what is working, what is not working, what are the patterns of improvement, and eventually how to sort of continue developing things to their successful ending. Then we have sort of being reflexive is just trying to always understand and have a discussion of what the world is, where we are, and sort of in a way taking the pulse of the world and what is happening so that you're very well oriented. Then the notion of history is quite important, and it's always need to be brought up how we got here and how things originated, and eventually that sort of begins to dictate where we might be going and why they would be what they are. And finally, adapt versus embrace. What that means is sort of like when something new comes to you, sort of in terms of the digital space, a lot of times we just simply rush to embrace it wholesale and just really get it, and without any question, and just simply say, okay, well, that seems to be new, that seems to be in demand, that seems everybody says I need to have it. So I think that we should try to sort of adapt things as they're needed, as they're useful, and as they're sort of pleasant, if you wish, right? And sort of rather than just simply embrace wholesale everything. And that would be that. So that comes to the end of my presentation.